This is the Good Morning Isla 200 show.
This podcast was prepared by the Fall 2023 cohort of Isla 200 Islamic Civilizations at McGill University.
Grab a warm drink and tune in as our presenters take you on a deep dive into Islamicate history with reflections on how they relate to contemporary Muslim life and culture.
Hello! Welcome to our podcast for Isla 200. I'm Miranda and I'm joined by Val, Aya, Jenna, and Aya. And we are here today to discuss how pre-Islamic poetry compares to modern Islamicate artistic and literary works. So we have two poems from pre-Islamic Arabia and two songs from modern times made by singers. And we are excited to discuss how they're similar and what they reflect about society. We're going to start out with Aya discussing what the term Islamicate means.
Hi, my name is Aya. Thank you, Miranda, for your beautiful introduction. Before we get to the core of our subject, there's an important term to bring up that will be relevant for the rest of the podcast, and it's a term that we talked a lot about in class, especially at the start of the semester, and that is the word Islamicate. We wanted to mention the term at the start of the podcast just to set a precedent for the rest of the conversation because it's very relevant to the rest of the conversation. I'm just going to give you guys quickly the definition of the word Islamicate. So in the book, The Venture of Islam by Hodgson that we went over, in depth in class, he defines Islamicate as a broad term that evokes Islam, its past, present, and future. Yet Islamicate influences exceed any creedal or cultural limits. So it's a term that is not restricting our references to religion, but it's just hinting at the more broader Islamic world and Arabic world in general. Like we mentioned in the beginning, we're going to be talking about pre-Islamic poetry, but also works that are not explicitly, more modern works that are not explicitly religious or tied to one religion in particular. So that's why I really wanted to highlight and pinpoint the word before we get into the rest of our analysis. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Val, and the first part of our podcast would be focused on pre-Islamic poetry. In the first few weeks of our Islamic civilization class, we focused on pre-Islamic poetry and their concepts that were indicative of the culture of the time they were written in. More specifically, we will be discussing Al-Kansa and Antara ibn Shaddad. Miranda, take it away.
So the first poet that we're going to be discussing is Al-Kansa, and she is a woman poet from pre-Islamic Arabia, and she wrote the genre Rita, which is a genre that women of the time wrote. It's a genre that's known for being focused around themes of grief, so women would also write about their experiences grieving important men in their lives, and Al-Kansa is no exception. Al-Kansa's poems focused on her brother who was sent to war and then died, and then according to some historical sources, she actually asked another one of her brothers to go and avenge her first brother, and he also died. So she had a lot to be grieving in her life, and her poems were very reflective of this. There were a lot of really dramatic language used and a lot of really descriptive, details and language that was very interesting. The importance of Al-Kansa's poems are that they are very indicative of, I think, women's roles during the time that she wrote them. Specifically how women played the role of mourners, which was either a job or a social role that they played within their family. So that women were writing these Rita poems about their grief and their mourning is very indicative. Another note about Al-Kansa's poems that actually I am taking from Professor Hartman's own article on Al-Kansa is that she was for a long time treated as sort of an anomaly among women in pre-Islamic Arabia. But her poems are just sort of well-preserved sources that discuss that like well-preserved sources that are reflective of what a lot of women were doing. So while she was originally treated as like this woman who, you know, wrote these poems that were really sort of revolutionary and like really indicative of the Islamic world that Arabia would soon turn into, they were actually just kind of poems that are reflections of the times. And I think that is a really important thing to look at when discussing pre-Islamic Arabia. So because women are known as mourners in the society that Alcanza lived in, and because they were sort of restricted to these like poems of grief, you have to analyze the poems a little bit further than just their like outward themes of grief to kind of understand like specifically what makes each of the poems unique and what the poems indicates about the writer. Alcanza, for example, this is lost in English translations because it's very specific to the Arabic language versions of the poems, but she was really good at writing poems in the Rita format, so that's not a format that you can reflect in English, but she did a beautiful job of it, and I think that that's kind of why her poems stayed so relevant too, is because people were like, these are really good, and then basically what happens is people are like, she did a really good job of writing these poems, and then people are like, oh, like she was a woman writing poems, she must have been, you know, so exceptional at writing poems, but actually she was just good at this poem that like everyone was writing, or all the women were writing. And then you can look at kind of the language that she uses to sort of understand more like anthropological aspects of what was going on at the time. So like what sort of objects she describes, like how she describes the weather, like that just can sort of indicate like patterns of society that are even just beyond like what Alcanza's writing about. So she was a writer who wrote well, and because of that her poems were preserved, and now today we can use the poems to look at what women were doing during Alcanza's time and what society was like in general, and I think that that's really cool. Yeah, I just want to open the floor up to discussion about Alcanza and what kind of role she played and what you guys think about her as a poet.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for, you know, explaining that so well. Well, personally, I think that when it comes to poems about mourning and grief being specifically written by women, on one hand, I think what's interesting is that it can be very limiting because suddenly they're so restricted to this one area that they should be writing about. But I think that something else that isn't as much talked about is how it can be quite empowering. I think that women in general are capable of encapsulating sentiments and emotions so well.
True.
And it's like when you think of a mother's love, they're so capable of expressing it and taking care of another person. So honestly, who better to write about grief than a woman?
Right, I feel like we like can express feelings a lot better. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess like that's for that's in my opinion.
More often than not.
Yeah.
There's like great poets, like male poets, but I think
Oh,
in
for
general,
sure.
like in the grand scheme of things, women have that.
Yeah.
Yeah, even
A lot.
like in modern times, like you see like there's still like themes like even in movies of like women being people who are like the more caring ones. And
Right.
Oh,
But I this is kind of off topic, but like I feel like that kind of feels like the toxic masculinity in general, like in society. Like if you're saying like women are like XYZ character trait, like emotional, like sentimental, like that can also easily be translated into like toxic masculinity where men are repelling those traits in general. It's kind of talking about more of like a feminism.
yeah.
But like I feel like women are very emotional but that can also really easily be like pitted against them just in their writing, in everyday life. I feel like that's something that women are usually targeted against and seen as weaker from. So I do think having like the genre be like more like this like being more towards women is like a good space for them to like share their like work and be empowered. I agree with that, but I also think that it like calling women like emotional and like being more like capable of conveying those thoughts can also like lead into like the gender norms in society.
The agenda.
Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely a double-sided sword, and I think that's the problem is initially it was something that was meant to be, you know, a great opportunity for women to showcase something they're great at, or like a lot of the case we're great at, it became all they were restricted to.
This is
and
the only thing you can do.
Exactly,
That's the issue.
that's what the problem came from. It's like they should be able to write about grief and about mourning if they're good at it and if they want it, but then that's not all they should be able to do.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of like the initial criticism in like the 20th century about the way that people were treating Alcanza's poems as just poems about grief came from. Is like they were like, hey, like she is writing about grief, but that's all that she could write about, so let's look a little deeper at like what else she is writing about within her like writings of grief, which I think has sort of like helped shape like the new way that people look at Rita and look at just like the more fine details of like what they indicate about Alcanza and about the society she lived in, beyond just women's role as grievers.
Right, and I remember this, like we kind of like discussed this in class, and they were saying like how Alcanza was like showing like love to like her brothers, and it's seen as like incest because like, well, I just feel like, I don't know, like yeah, women should have the right to express themselves, but a lot of not historians, but I guess like just like society in general, when they're like looking back, they're like, oh yeah, she's like showing her love and like dedicating like poems to like her brothers. That's like incest. Like I think women should have like the right to just express their emotions to like anyone.
Like incest is not a word. Like there's a couple words that shouldn't be like just thrown around. You know what I mean? And that's like a way of shutting down the conversation.
Yeah.
Like you're not even reading, you're not even acknowledging what she's doing,
Yeah.
you're not even taking in the context. You're like, no, but that's incest. Like, bye, that's it.
Yeah, and I think that's what sucks, is that suddenly we have a woman who's so great at what she's doing, and you have to associate it to a man, and you have to associate it
she's
to...
being sexualized for her
exactly,
writings.
which is horrible. How can you sexualize writing about grieving her brother?
About dead
She's
brothers.
not even like doing, the least like, the only topic where you couldn't even like find like a drop of romance.
They still did.
You still managed to turn it on its head.
Romanticize it, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, but no, interesting.
Yeah, I think that kind of just shows that like no matter what like women do in like writing in general, like there's always gonna be like a critique or like it is like there's always gonna be something that someone's gonna say about
like
it.
an assumption.
Yeah, an assumption, or like as you guys talked about, like sexualizing women. That's like I think like a major theme here that we've kind of like figured out in this discussion.
For sure.
Okay, that was some great discussions on Alcanza. We're going to move on now to Val, who's going to discuss our second pre-Islamic poet. Take it away.
So, another example of pre-Islamic poetry we studied in class is Antara ibn Shaddad's war songs. A little bit about Antara. So, his father was Arabic and his mother was a slave from Africa, so he was born multiracial. In pre-Islamic days, there was a common superstition that mixed race, or hajins, as they call it, were destined to be inferior, and they were considered as a slave. As Arabic tribal politics states that children born to a slave mother are automatically born into slavery. He was also rarely acknowledged by his father. The topic of internalized racism would later be explored and brought up in the themes of the poems he writes. So through this small background of our poet, Antara, we already see that there was racism in ancient Arabia. This history of racism originated when the Christian king of Ethiopia invaded Mecca but failed. So there was a negative representation of black people. Thus, there was discrimination based on gender, race, and class. This was a part of pre-Islamic society. Slavery was also widespread and accepted as a norm. And black became the color of evil and demons, and dark-skinned people in Africa were perceived as backward. And it's ironic because in the Quran, 2 verses mention different languages and colors of people. So the Prophet Muhammad viewed the diversity of races and colors not as a God-sanctioned discrimination, but as an expression of a miracle by God. Symbolism in the Quran had nothing to do with skin color, but it acquired that connotation. Back to Antara. He was a warrior and wanted to marry Abla, his cousin and lover, but was looked down upon due to his status. So he went to the battlefield and came back, and was finally acknowledged for his heroism in war, especially by his father, who had neglected him since he was young due to his multiracial status. Of course, acknowledgement and validity don't just automatically erase internalized racism. Antara's poetry was his own space for liberation and subjectivity, where he reaffirms himself, and that his blackness does not diminish his rank and high status in society, which he has attained through heroic deeds in wars. So again, in his poetry, he is always trying to prove his worth to his tribe. However, he asserts his blackness as if his self needs constant confirmation to defend his black half. I think it's really interesting to see how people of the pre-Islamic society link humanity to masculinity. More specifically, Antara does this in one of his poems that became one of the Mu'allaqats, 7 hanging poems that are regarded as the best poetry of the pre-Islamic era. Composing his Mu'allaqat in response to an insult about his blackness and as a way to confess his love for Abla, he boasts about his moral qualities and masculinity and expresses on his thoughts on the battlefield for Abla. In the introduction, we see the word nasib, meaning destiny or fate, which describes Abla. In the second section, describes his journey on his horse. Then in the third section is the warrior's boast, which epitomizes his noble qualities and his prowess in battle and heroic deeds. Some key takeaway from Antara's poems and the Mu'allaqat is that the category of race can be brought to bear on individual Arabic texts. It can also be used as a generic core principle for rethinking Arab literary history and Arabic literature. It shapes history and presents to us the themes, concepts, structures, and society's views on the poetry as a form of expression during that era. So, what are our thoughts? I think racism and internalized racism is still definitely a concept that is frequently discussed in not only literature but other art forms like songs.
That was awesome, Val. Thank you so much. I think one thing that I really remember as sticking out to me when we were first researching Antara is that in some of his later works, like as he became this more like famous, rich, and successful figure in pre-Islamic Arabia, he kind of wrote less and less about his blackness and about being like mixed race, and just kind of wrote more like as like this really rich, like brave warrior, and the style of poetry that he was doing was boastful. So, you know, I think that it's interesting that like despite like race and his blackness being a really important part of like his identity, like how just sort of the culture of the time like asked him to or forced him to even like abandon it once he became successful, and like to be the successful figure that he was meant like abandoning sort of a part of his racial identity.
I mean, it's not a comment on your particular poem or poet, but I just like that intentionally or unintentionally, whatever. We talked about the cross section of Miranda talked more about gender, and you touched more on race. So I feel like that's a nice touch that really encompasses like the topics of the
intersectionality.
Exactly.
Intersection.
Of like relevant topics that are still very important to this day.
Yeah, it wasn't until like last century that the term intersectionality was used.
Exactly, and I feel like it gives you a great overview of pre-Islamic poetry.
I think it says a lot about how things that are usually inherent to us and our identity and things that we shouldn't even justify by ourselves, like our gender and our race, suddenly become the center of the conversation because there's so many issues around it. And I hate that. Like, why can't he just continue writing about all his other qualities? Why does it have to be... Obviously, he now has, like, a platform to write about race, but why was he writing about that?
Or, like, more overall, it's still a question that, like, we don't have the answer to, but, yeah, why when, like, making art or poems or songs, whatever, one of the first things that you go to defend or like talk about is something that is so concrete. I mean,
it's who you
like,
are.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
like that's kind of suspicious.
I mean,
but yeah,
I think looking at like every different like writer's like piece of work really just shows like you said, like the intersection of where they're coming from, and understanding that they do have various different parts of themselves that are coming towards their work is something that we need to like definitely think about when reading texts and like looking at like the different writers like Antara and Alcanza. They both come from different backgrounds, and so they have like different opinions that they can put into their work. And I think that really makes like understanding that can like it just understanding where they're coming from, I think enriches us and like enriches the work. And I think it's just like it's interesting to like get, like you said, like the different perspectives from different art like authors.
The same time period,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Great.
And also, I think it's really interesting how, like, the themes or, like, the, issues, I guess, presented, through, like, pre-Islamic poetry is, like, still issues in, like, today's society.
Yeah, it's still
Yeah, like,
relevant.
gender and, like, race, like, it's still,
Top
like,
of the
pretty
list.
prominent, yeah.
You would think that we'd come a long way. But these
You know,
are
right?
honestly, it's like evolution stops as soon as it comes to gender and race.
Mm-hmm.
Everything around keeps moving, which is, yeah.
I think no, it does. I mean, it doesn't. I know what you mean. I don't think it stops, but just the goalpost moves as we move. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
But I mean, we've come a long way. That's why we're here.
For sure.
But also, yeah. I mean, it's
If
still,
if we're still having these conversations today, it's because there's still issues
there's still
to
something
fix.
to talk about.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We
Exactly.
don't have to just write about our dead family members anymore, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
That is great.
Our brothers.
Exactly.
Baby steps. We'll change the world. We'll change the world one day.
Yeah.
Okay, that was such a great discussion on Antara's poetry. Now we're going to be moving on to part 2 of our podcast, which is the importance of orality, which will blend into the modern works.
All right, great. Thanks for having me. So I think I'm mostly going to be talking about how the prevalence of poetry in pre-Islamic civilization mostly derives from the overall importance of orality in Islam. So oral traditions were actually first established as a means for preservation. The miracle, for example, of the Quran is not only revered for its message, but also the way that it was passed on over time. The oral tradition of the Quran playing a very crucial role in its conservation. So surahs were actually passed on through recitation, which began a pattern that would gradually see the entire Quran as we know it today come together. And so this oral tradition was so strong that it continued to be the primary method of transmitting the Quran for several centuries. And not only was it encouraged to recite it, but more particularly in a very lyrical and, melodic way, which we can compare to more modern art. So for example, on one hand we have tajweed, which we studied a lot in class, and it involves learning the correct pronunciation of each Arabic letter, as well as the rules for elongation, pausing, and stopping in recitation. But then, on another hand, a term that we talk about a lot less is actually tartil. It's a term that refers to the measured, melodious tone and rhythm of the Quran, often characterized by a slow and deliberate pace. And the word itself actually appears in Islamic scripture when they say, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, and it literally means to recite the Quran properly in a measured way. So through this process, many people actually began to harness the emotional and spiritual power of reciting. So not only were Muslims able to connect with the message more deeply as it evokes powerful emotions, but also when reciting in a group setting in general, it creates a sense of unity and community. And I think this incomparable yet powerful ability to connect with others explains the emergence of poetry and modern music. So actually, poetry and music owe a lot of their success to the intrinsic power of orality, a force that transcends, written language and resonates deeply within human culture. The oral tradition rooted in the art of spoken word and musical expression has been a dynamic vehicle for transmission of emotions, stories, and even cultural identity across generations. And so through the fluidity of oral communication, poetry and music found an organic medium for their evolution. And so then, what's a better way to spread Islamic culture than through oral forms of art? We can refer to many artists, both traditional and modern, who continue to take advantage of the immediacy and the intimacy of oral transmission to foster a direct connection between themselves and the audience, allowing for a nuanced conveyance of emotions that might be lost in written form.
Okay, thank you, Aya. That was a beautiful description. The only thing that I wanted to say real quick is that, to me, orality and tajweed is really important as an intermediate, like, Arab speaker, because my first interactions with the Quran, although I do speak Arabic or like a dialect of Arabic, was what really jumped out to me was the rhythm and the orality and the tajweed, because I felt a lack of not being able to understand most of the words, despite like speaking Arabic. What really got to me is that and what I appreciated was that despite not understanding the meaning of everything, I feel like I still like understood all of it on a deeper level. So like that's a really important aspect to me in Arabic music in general, but also in the Quran. Like every time I felt like I was missing out, I'm like, I don't, and I was like, no, I do get it because I feel it when I listen to it. So I feel like that's a really, really important thing to talk about when talking about.
And so,
Arabic.
for example, this past year I was lucky to go on pilgrimage to Mecca
Ah,
in December, and
that's insane.
It was a
My mom
phenomenal
just
experience.
came from Mecca yesterday.
Wow.
That's insane. Wow.
Phenomenal
Mashallah for
experience.
real.
And
Wow.
something that was so moving, and I wish this emotion upon everyone.
Yeah.
It was, you would find crowds who are coming from like Indonesia. They are not native Arab speakers because they are from Asia, and Indonesia has the most, Muslims in the world, which is crazy. They don't speak Arabic. But then you would have these crowds, and you'd have one man leading the group of 20 people, reciting, Arabic writing, and then they would just repeat after him. And they wouldn't know particularly what they're saying, and they can't read it, but just repeating it out loud all together creates this wave of emotion, and it's amazing. Everyone's doing it collectively.
That's why
really,
it's so
really
important.
great.
Like I learned parts of the Quran without ever knowing what it meant, and I just knew it because of the rhythm, because of the emotion, and like when I grew older and stuff, I looked into it, and then I could like do 1 + this means that, like that makes sense and stuff. But at the core, like when I learned about it, it was all about the rhythm and how it sounds and how it makes you feel. That's what I wanted to highlight. Despite speaking Arabic, you know what I mean? I still had a hard time, and really the rhythm really did it for me. Like yeah. So yeah.
It's great. So speaking of orality, it's definitely relevant to talk about how modern artists were inspired by oral traditions to spread Islamicate culture. So I'm going to give the floor to Aya to lead this conversation.
يا قدس يا قدس يا قدس يا مدينة الصلاة صلي عيوننا إليك ترحل كل يوم ترحل كل يوم تدور في أروقة المعابد تعانق الكنائس القديمة وتمسح الحزن عن المساجد عيوننا إليك ترحل كل يوم ترحل كل يوم.
What you just heard is an excerpt of the song Zahrat al-Madin by Fairuz. Fairuz, who is a Christian Orthodox Lebanese singer, very, very iconic figure in the Arabic world. First, I'll start by giving you guys a couple of fun facts about the song. So the song was written in 1967 as a response to the Naqsa, which was a 6-day war fought between Israel and Arab countries, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. The Arabs lost the war, and Fairuz decided to, get inspired by the, sad moment in history to write the song. The song is 8 minutes long. It's very long. I'm just going to be covering a couple of sentences, but it is a very long and in-depth song. a very obvious link that could be done with pre-Islamic poetry is the fact that it was written by a Lebanese poet, so it was first written as a poem, and then it got, made into a song. A year after the song came out, Fairuz was given a key to Jerusalem from the cultural committee of the city because of the impact and the meaning of the song, which I think is very cute. And last fun fact that I wanted to mention was that I don't know a lot about Arabic poems and poets, but I know about Mahmoud Darwish, which is like an iconic poet in English, Arabic, French, whatever. And he was a famous Palestinian poet. And he said that Fairuz has artistically done more for Palestine than anyone else through her songs and writings, which I think is very interesting and relevant in like the times we're living in. But also like a nice thing like to remember that what's going on right now has been going on for a long time. And just the impact of like poems and lyrics and songs, etc. The first thing that we can notice without paying any attention to the lyrics is the very slow and emotional delivery that can be reminiscent of everything that Aya talked about, oral tradition, tajweed in the Quran. And like I touched on before, the first thing that I noticed without paying attention to the lyrics or, diving into the song was really her delivery, and it was the thing that made me emotional and like connect to the song. And also overall it plays into like a religious atmosphere. The rest of the song, like I said, is 8 minutes, has a choir of men and women, which really adds and like highlights the religious aspects and undertones of the song. I'm going to be focusing on a couple of sentences, and I'm going to translate them. They're going to be translated in English. So the song goes, O Jerusalem, O Jerusalem, O Jerusalem, O city of prayer, I'm praying. Our eyes wander to you every day. They roam around the hallways of the temples, embrace the old churches, and wipe away the grief of the mosques. A thing that really jumped out to me when first reading the lyrics, again, another very important thing that we talked about in pre-Islamic poetry, is the personification of things in general, but more precisely the personification of the eyes. So in this song she says, our eyes wander to you, they roam, they embrace, they wipe away. So really just, the eyes are really symbolic, as they are like the windows to the soul and whatever. And they were symbolic in pre-Islamic poetry, and like they have been a long time in poetry and literature, etc. So I thought that was really interesting. So the title, Zahrat al-Madin, Madin means city in Arabic, but throughout the song, Fairuz mentions like more precisely the city of Jerusalem. It's one of the most popular songs that deals with the issue of the polarizing issue of Jerusalem in general. Jerusalem is a very important city and is very meaningful to this song because it subtly hints at the idea of peace, coexistence, and religious diversity, which is very like relevant in general, but also very relevant to Fairuz, particularly because she was embraced by the Muslim world, but she was herself like a Christian. So she's just speaking more broadly to like, peace and, Jerusalem being a holy city for anyone who wants to deem it as their holy city, and the idea that people from different faiths can coexist, can live peacefully. And that is really, a great example of that is just how in the small excerpt that I read out loud, she, in her 3 sentences, she talks about temples, churches, and mosques. Really just as, so she says, we roam the hallways of the temple, we embrace the old churches, and we wipe away the grief of the mosques. So yeah, just really like how, shouting out every religion and highlighting the fact that it's not about religion and how people, can believe whatever they want to believe and coexist peacefully. Yeah.
I think this is such a powerful message, honestly, that she conveys. First of all, I have 2 major thoughts. So the first one is about how coexistence is a very major theme, and suddenly you're not, like, for example, she has a lot of songs about patriotism in general. So this is specifically about Jerusalem, but she also has a lot of songs about Lebanon.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be particularly Palestinian or Lebanese to be able to connect to those songs.
Exactly. Yeah.
The second you're talking about peace, you're all for it. You know, you're all like,
It's all encompassing.
Dami Falastini. It's
Yeah,
always, you. I think it's a great way to help. We talked about it connect a lot of people and it brings unity. And then also something else is I'd like to talk about her delivery. I can't help but compare it to how it honestly has a very grieving tone.
Yeah.
Almost like it's a cry. And then that's very similar to how poetry was honestly predominantly, women were writing about grief. And so it's like, well, did that really
translate or like fade into
exactly.
it? Yeah.
So is that still expected today to write about?
Sorry to cut. I don't think it's I think she is grieving. I mean, like I said, the song was written after, the loss of a war. So it's not about her. I don't think it's her, like you said, she has lots of different songs, lots of different themes. I don't think it's her trying to fit into a particular, genre or whatever. I think she's actually, when she's talking, she repeats, oh Jerusalem, Jerusalem. She doesn't have to explicitly say it. You hear it that she's grieving for the city, the loss of that city, and the loss of, what that city meant. The temples, the mosques, the churches, everything that it encompasses and embodies. So I feel like sometimes people are expected to, grieve and have that emotion. Sometimes they do feel that emotion, I feel like, it was felt through, like you said.
Yeah, and I think it's just that she's great at it, honestly.
True.
She
is the icon.
She's amazing. Who better to sing about countries and peace than her?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so, because I am doing a minor in music, I can't help but analyze it from the musical perspective.
That's great!
So, I just, I kind of tied it back to, the recitation of, the Quran. It's I can kind of hear the similarities in the movement of notes. It's really interesting because the way that, I think, this is, an Arabic song.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, Arabic songs, they don't use the same, musical structure or musical keys or structures as Western music, and I just kind of looked into this just now, and it's called Maqam, so Maqam, and I can kind of see so the Quran, the notes of it is also in the Maqam key, and the song also uses notes
the
from
same
the Maqam key. Yeah, so it's I can kind of tie that connection, and there's definitely some, I wouldn't say I guess inspirations. It's just just kind of inspired by, how the tones of
flow and
flow,
sound.
Yeah. Also the rhythm as well.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
True.
It's really cool.
I'm gonna pass it off to Jenna, the last person that's gonna talk in the podcast. And she's also going to be analyzing a more modern song. So off to you.
Yeah, so I'll be looking at Mahir Zain, who is a Swedish-Lebanese artist whose work is very popular in the Muslim community and all throughout the world. He became a worldwide sensation with his debut album, Thank You Allah, in 2009 and made many advances in the modern music world. This album was the best-selling record of the decade in Malaysia, and he has been nominated for 2 World Music Awards, the Best Middle Eastern Artist in 2014 and the Best Middle Eastern Artist in 2015, and also he won the Music Newcomer Award in 2010, so he's very acclaimed. This being said, his style of music is nasheed, which is a devotional lyrical song, usually without instruments, and focuses on the praise of Allah. Anasheeds, which is the plural version of the nasheed, occur in many different languages such as Urdu, Punjabi, Arabic, Farsi, and others, and is important in delivering the message about Islam and in uplifting their iman or their faith. So nasheed is really important for expression and important in spreading the message of Islam. So one of his most popular songs is Rahmatun Lil Alamin, which was published in 2022 and is a very good example of nasheed. So we'll just be listening to a little clip from that.
يا من ألفت قلوبا بالإسلام يا يا حبيبي يا شفيعي يا رسول الله بأمي وأبي فديتك سيدي صلاة وسلام عليك يا نبي حبيبي يا محمد أتيت بالسلام والهدى محمد حبيبي يا محمد يا رحمة للعالمين يا محمد.
Okay, so the song has a really nice rhythm and tone and clearly emphasizes his devotion to Allah. He places an emphasis by elongating the notes on the words Muhammad and Allah, which further enhances the devotional message of the song. There are some instrumentals in the background. However, this is not a very common quality of the nasheed historically, but it has been something that's been kind of over time has been more part of the nasheed song. But given the main focus on the devotional and lyricality of the song, it is a good representation of a nasheed. So the music video of Rahmatun Lil Alamin includes the English translation subtitles, so it is important to understand that the English translation can never be exact, seeing that you are unable to recreate a piece of work that holds the same meanings and intentions as the original, as we talked about in class. So the meanings of words can be lost in translation, but when looking at the translation, we can still see the devotional messages in his work. The lines, "My beloved, O Muhammad," or the line, "O you who illuminated our hearts with the Quran," are key examples of this. So Maher Zain clearly places a lot of emotion into his work and transcends this devotion and meaningfulness in his songs. So I think that his work has a very nice rhythm, and you can feel the emotions passing through the music. And I feel like the music would make people feel very connected to the music because of how much love and respect is conveyed. And Rahmatun Lil Alamin has a very clear lyrical message, as said before, which increases the strength of his praisal of Allah. Okay, so I'm going to start off the discussion. So personally, I found the song to be very catchy. It's been on my mind. I've been thinking about it. So it's kind of stuck with me. And I found that his words are very powerful, even though it's pretty clear and direct. So I feel like the melody was really easy to kind of follow and understand. And so the devotional tone of the nasheed style really came across, and I can see why the song was so popular and why he's so acclaimed today. I just think it's really important to have this portrayal in the media today.
Yeah.
And seeing that he's so acclaimed just shows that it has kind of reached a lot of people and has impacted a lot of people. And seeing that song is a really good way to show culture and religion, and that's just something that. And seeing that he's so famous, it just feels like it's definitely been.
Despite being what some would think at first glance is just a pop song that has a kind of poppy rhythm to it, whatever. It's interesting to see that it is a religious song. It is about Allah. It is about Muhammad. It is about devotion, which is fun. Songs about religion don't have to be boring.
Yeah, it's really fun and upbeat. And I read something that he replaced Justin Bieber at some point. So he's very
on the charts.
And purchases on Amazon.
Oh,
wow! The Arab people pulled through.
So so he does. He is reaching a lot of people, which is really good. I feel like, especially because it's the media, and I think it's just good to show that side.
And I think in general, personally, when I think of religious music, I think Christian music is very famous. Hallelujah, gospel, exactly. But then the conversation isn't as talked about or when it comes to Islam, and it's actually very, it's a great way. I think he took his Swedish heritage and kind of took that Western culture and poured it into maybe, making songs about Islam. Why not do that? And I think it's a great way to, again, spread the Islamicate culture.
Yeah.
Right. There is a reason why the melody is so catchy, because it follows a pop song structure. A lot of the instruments they used, it's very you would hear in other pop songs of this day,
That's true.
So it's really interesting how there are artists that are still staying true to what they make about Islam, being Muslim,
their faith and stuff.
Their own thing, but then they're also incorporating I guess things from today's culture.
A more modern twist
to it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and to that point also, where in like Alcanza's poem, like for example, you can look at her lyrics to kind of indicate like what the dynamic of like the society she was living in like was, and like her poem reflects that really well. Like in this song, like without even looking at the lyrics, like just the melody is really reflective of like modern times, like in our music taste. Like it sort of is a good reflection of like this like musical aspect of our culture right now.
Here, wasn't made 100 years ago.
Yeah.
If you,
But then there is still that influence from, for example, the way that the Quran is meant to be recited and tajweed. The way he elongates his words is very, very similar to when you're reciting the Quran.
like
So
she said,
it's-
Muhammad
exactly.
Allah, when he's,
So it's a really perfect mixture of, kind of staying true to the traditional side of things, but then obviously, like, adapting it to how it is today.
It mirrors, like, modern society. It mirrors, I feel like also it mirrors the experience of someone, like, being, like, a first-generation immigrant. Like, I mean, he's Lebanese, but also, like, Swedish. So I feel like you get that,
Absolutely.
the two sides of the coins, kind of. So, yeah.
Okay, we have talked about some really awesome things today, starting from pre-Islamic poetry all the way down to some very modern works from singers. And I think that we all feel pretty happy with the points that we've reached, discussing like how, first of all, how much like change there has been in the kind of art put out by the Arabic community, and second of all, how much similarities like we can still find, especially in what's indicated in the works of like the society that they were created in, and in the orality of the works. I think that there's some really cool conclusions we can draw, and I'm really glad that we got to discuss all of this. We're really feel like we learned a lot this semester, and we are really grateful to you for listening. So thanks so much.
Thank you for getting till the end.
This podcast was prepared by the Fall 2023 cohort of ISLA 200 Islamic Civilizations at McGill University.